Hi, this is Lauren from Axilent. This is another in a series of screencasts we're doing introducing you to the Axilent platform. And today I want to look at integration. Now Axilent provides a number of different ways to integrate with it, so you can use it in conjunction with whatever front-end technology, be it a web framework of some sort or a mobile app. And also you can integrate it with it on the back end, so you can use it in conjunction with your favorite content management system. The primary means we provide for this is to provide a REST API that's reachable over HTTP, and I'm going to walk you through that and kind of the way that you would go about integrating with Axilent, as well as show you a little bit about what's available as far as integration is concerned. Now in the Axilent Control Center here, we have a dedicated section for integration. On the far right you see the integration tab here, which is where we are now, and it will show you the various information that you'll need in order to do integration with Axilent. The first thing I would like to show is the documentation. As soon as you go to the integration tab here, you'll see this box here, looking for documentation, and that is kind of the link to the three primary sources of documentation that you'll want to be looking at for integration. So the first is our main documentation site, which is docs.axilent.com, where this video will be hosted, as well as all of the other documentation, tutorials, and recipes and whatnot for working with Axilent. Now if you're looking for API reference documentation, which is the reference documentation for the actual Axilent API itself, this is the link to it from here. And if you want to know specifically, it can be found at www.axilent.net/API/dir, and it looks like this, and this is everything that you'll need as far as reference is concerned for the API. Finally, we have an online support community at Get Satisfaction, and you get this link to it here. And it's getsatisfaction.com/Axilent, and there we'll be on hand to answer questions that you have regarding anything to do with Axilent, really, but especially including integration. All right, there are two different kinds of integration that we have with Axilent. There's integration with a deployment target, or as we call them, a graph stack. So in previous screencasts we've covered deployment targets. They are places that you push content and content channels out to where they become available via the API. So when we do integrations with that, we're doing integrations with specific graph stacks, and what will be available to us when we do those integrations is whatever's been deployed to that graph stack. So that's one kind of integration. The other kind of integration has to do with integration directly with a library for a project, and we have an API for that that we provide that allows you to do things like push content directly into the library. There are three APIs that we provide at this point. There is the content API and the triggers API. We'll be going into both of these in detail. Those are both graph stack APIs. They are things that you would address specific graph stacks when you use them. And then the library integration provides the library API, and there's no graph stacks involved with that. When you use the library API, you're just working directly with the library for a project. So I want to take you on a brief tour of the API documentation here, just to give you a leg up on how to read it. As I said, there are three main APIs documented: triggers, content, and library. There is if you look at the API documentation here, you'll see the name of the API at the top, and then there's a version. And what we're doing is we'll be updating the API from time to time, and what we'll do is we'll maintain multiple versions of it. So if you have something integrated, it won't break, and that gives you a period of time during which you can update your application to use the newer version of the API. The older version will still work. It'll just be deprecated, and you'll be encouraged to upgrade. But we're not gonna surprise cut you off. So in the documentation here, you'll actually see multiple versions of documentation. So here's Axilent triggers. Beta 3, as of our public beta launch, Beta 3 is the current up-to-date version of the API. And it will show you, here's the Beta 3 triggers functions here. So here's a function, trigger. This is how you send a trigger into Axilent. And it will show you the name of the function. It will show you the full path, HTTPS path, to send the function. So this will be axilent.net/API, axilent.triggers, beta 3 trigger. Next, there is a line about this being a data parsing function. So either functions will be one of two things. They'll either be functions in which you need to post a JSON chunk of data, or they are functions in which you can pass parameters as a query string. And the way HTTP works, of course, for JSON to be able to post, you will need to use a post or a put method, whereas for the other kind, you can just use get if you want. But triggers, you need to post serialized JSON data. And then finally, it's telling you that this requires the triggers permission. So when you use the API key with this, what you'll need to do is make sure that that API key has the triggers permission. Then there's a short description about what this does. Registers a trigger. And then it may have some more information here, but importantly what it'll do is it will list the parameters that this function accepts, and it'll show you the type of parameters. These are Unicode strings, or this is a dictionary, meaning like it's a series of key value pairs. Importantly, it'll tell you what's required and what's not required, and it'll show you the default values, which are significant for not required parameters, because that's what will be used, and a little description of each. So, for example, in the case of a trigger, if we look at the required parameters first, we see that it must have a category, and it must have an action, and everything else is pretty much optional. The other thing in this particular one is it's showing you that it has this one parameter environment, and it's will tell you that in the this is a dictionary, key value pairs that it's looking for, and these are the components of that it would be looking for. So here's a for example a function with no variables at all, no parameters at all. Profile, you just call it. And then you'll see as we scroll down there are previous versions of the same API. So here's the old trigger, and you'll see this big deprecated, use beta 3. Whenever something's deprecated, it will have a message telling you which is the non-deprecated version of this. So in some cases, now if you're familiar with REST, you know that REST deals with the concept of resources, which respond to different HTTP methods in different ways. So the idea that, roughly speaking, a get HTTP method would retrieve a resource, whereas a post would create one, and a put would update it, and delete would delete it. What we've done with this API is that we've looked at kind of the problem space that we need to solve, and things that are best modeled as resources, we've used the REST model for that. For things that are not particularly well suited towards modeling them as resources, we've just used regular functions. Both of these are HTTP calls, but they work in slightly different ways. So for example, here in the content API right here, content is a resource, and it actually defines one method, which is operates on the get. So you need to use a get request in order to address this content resource, and then here are the parameters it wants to see. Whereas on the other hand, something like content channel group or content channel are just regular functions. And in fact, actually, as long as it meets the requirements of being able to pass these parameters in, it doesn't really care what you use as far as an HTTP method is concerned. A post would work just as well as a get in this case. And again, we have older versions of this. Now, the one sort of gotcha in the API documentation right now is that we did rename an API. And this will survive for the rest of the beta period. But when we go when we end the beta period, we'll just take this out completely. So don't use it. But you'll see down here there's something called AirTower, and it only goes up to beta 1. If you see the deprecation sign on here, you will see that it has been replaced by the beta 3 version of the Axilent Library API. So AirTower was the old name for library. Ignore the AirTower API. Use the library API instead. So notably, as we mentioned before, the library integration is not against a specific graph stack. Everything else is. So this is the library API, and in this case, you need to use a library key in order to address this API, whereas the deployment target keys are what you would use for everything else. So this is the one special case, the Axilent Library API. And actually, this is a good example of a resource here. You can post content, which will create new content items in the library, or you can put content, which will update a pre-existing content item in the library. Now, our APIs are all protected by security features. So the first thing that you're going to need to do when you're doing an integration is to get an API key. And there are two different kinds of keys. One is for deployment targets, graph stacks, the other is for library. So to make an API key, if you're going to be doing a deployment target API key, you go to the integration tab here. You would select one of the graph stacks in the list here. So let's say we're going to integrate with staging. Click on that, and it'll give us some options here, and we want to pick API key management. And there's already a key here. We can make a new one. So let's just do this, and call this like alternate key. And you'll see that there are permissions here that you can select from for the key. And for GraphStack key, there are two permissions. You can choose either one of them, triggers or content access. Or you can choose both of them if you want. Now, the permissions are important because the APIs require certain permissions, and the key is going to grant those permissions to you. So in other words, when you use a specific key, inherent in that key that you've generated are the permissions that you have, and that allows you to use various APIs. So we'll dig deeper into this in a second, but you'll see that, for example, this trigger function right here requires triggers permission, and so if we wanted to do something, we would have to select the triggers permission right here. So if we can make both of those, we could save that, and now we have the token, which is this hex string right here, and we would need to use that in order to address the API. Now, if you want to work with a library, it's a different route in. You would hit this configure library integration here, and then again hit API key management and add a library key. Library keys exclusively have the library permission. So in the API, you'll see in places that it needs the library permission, and the library keys will automatically have that. So you can just call this like actually call library key, and we add that, and there's the token. Again, that's what you would need. Okay, so let's have a look at a really simple integration here. I am going to be using this Chrome extension called REST Console, which I actually highly recommend. But you could use anything. You could use curl, or you could use any one of a number of different libraries and different programming languages. There's nothing special about this in particular. What I'm going to do is I'm going to be calling probably the simplest function we have here, which is profile. This is a convenience method to get a profile ID, which you can then use when you're sending triggers into the system that relate to a specific user. So the way you would use this is you would call this method if you had a new user, get the profile ID, and then associate it with that user, either with that session, or if it was somebody that logged into your site and kept coming back, permanently with their user identity. So what I'm going to do is start off with a key. So we'll grab, say, this key right here, which has the triggers and content access permissions, and go to our REST console. And here it has a section authorization where it allows me to set up basic auth. So I'm going to click on that, and then basic auth wants a username and a password field, and we take that token and we paste it right in there to the username and leave the password blank. Set that, and it hashes that all together like that. And then we'll go to our documentation here and grab this, which is the profile call, and paste that right in here into the request URI. So https www.axilent.net/API/axilent.triggers/beta3/profile. And since profile doesn't take any parameters, that is it. We just call get, and that is our response. Most responses will come back something like this, where you'll see it'll be a dictionary of some sort. In this case, it just has one entry called profile, and that is our brand new profile ID, which we can then store in our web app and reuse when we send in triggers. Okay, so let's try something a little more ambitious. In this case, integrating with a content channel. So we talked about content channels in our previous screencast. Basically, they're how you get content out of Axilent and to the front end of your website or mobile app or whatever. And in this case, I've created a test channel here, and what I've done is I've just made it 100% random content. This is really the easiest thing you can do, so you're not trying to figure out, why the channel is compositing content in a particular way at the same time as you're doing the integration. Random will just take a random bunch of content that's been deployed and populate the channel with it. Once you have it working, then go ahead and go back and fiddle with it to make it behave the way you want to. And of course, it's important that we have actually deployed it, push it out to our staging site, so it is actually available to us. So set up the REST console. I have already put in the API key here, and content channels are right here. Let's grab the Axilent content beta 3 content channel call and paste that here into the request URI. Now, channels absolutely require at least one parameter, which is the name of the channel. So let's add that. and it's actually we want to be passing it in slug form. So slugs are all lowercase, and the any white space has been replaced with dashes. So in our case, test channel is going to be all lowercase test dash channel, or in other words, this test channel. All right, so let's hit get. Boom, look at that. So this is the output of a content channel, and this is available to you to do whatever you want with when you get it for your front end. Let's look at it quickly. The whole thing comes in a big dictionary, and there's one entry called default, and this means the default group. There are no other groups right now, but in the future we might show how we'll group these things in different ways, in which case there might be multiple groups available. But right now you'll be looking inside default. In there will be a list of the content items, and each item will consist of itself a dictionary with two entries. One is the content itself, and the other is the endorsement value. Endorsement is the degree that Axilent believes this content is appropriate. So for example, when we were setting up the content channel in a previous screencast, we saw that with curated content you could specify that level. With things like field related and tag related, it will rank those according to how relevant they feel that the content it's recommending is to your base key. With random, these are fairly meaningless numbers. They generally all come back as 1, but you know, it's there in the format so you can see it. So often one of the things that you would simply do is list things in terms of descending endorsement. So the higher endorsement items happen first, the lower endorsement items happen afterwards. And then inside the content chunk here, there will be 3 entries. One is the key. This is the Axilent internal key for that content. The content type, which is whiskey. And then data is the payload. That is all of the stored information about this, which in the case of our whiskey example has a description, which is the main body. You can see that just sort of goes on. And then all those taste profile bits and the name. The other interesting part that comes back from a content channel is this meta entry. This is a peer to the default. And meta just contains metadata about the channel. Right now, there's only one entry in meta, and that is the name of the channel you addressed. Now you may ask, why do I need to know that I addressed the test channel? Because I just did that, right? I specified that in the request. Why are you telling that back to me? The answer actually has to do with channel groups, in which you can integrate with the channel group, and then it will select one of the channels inside the channel group and pass its results back to you, in which case this meta entry becomes important because you know which channel actually fired. We will look more into that in a subsequent screencast. And that is basically it for channels. I guess the other thing you would do, depending on the methods that you had chose for the channel, you would want to throw in other things. So profile would be a profile of the user who's accessing the content channel. So that was like that profile call we did before, it would be that string. Base key would be the content key of the reference content objects, and that's so if you're using field related content or tag related content, you need to throw in a base key so it knows what it's being related to. So base keys are basically these things right here, so that might be worth storing locally, so you know that if you have a local database representation of this particular whiskey, that as far as Axilent is concerned, it's this string. So when you pass a base key in, it would be this. And that's how you could do related content. And then optionally, if you want to throw in a limit, you can do this. This limit will override the max number of items returned configured in the channel. And you can limit it to 1 or 2 or some subset of whatever the max items are. There are some errors that you might see if something has not been deployed. For example, if you have a content channel that has a content type that has never been deployed, so no content from that type has ever been pushed out into this graph stack, but you have pushed out this content channel into the graph stack, and you're addressing it, you'll get back an error with a 409 header to it. So in HTTP, all responses have numerical values, and if we see the response header, here it is. So this is 200, which means OK. If it comes back 409, that's conflict, and that means that something is configured wrong in Axilent. Generally speaking, those errors are they tend to amount to the content type being referenced by the content channel has not ever been deployed to that graph stack. So you need to go in and deploy some stuff. The other possibility that you can get is if you have curated content where you have specifically selected the content and you have selected content items that haven't been deployed, then you get the same kind of problem, 409. The other common error you can get is 403, which means your API key is bad. You either are using a token that isn't valid, or you don't have the right permissions attached to that API key. So another common integration is triggers. Triggers are how you send information about users back to Axilent, which can then be used for reporting, or it can be used to guide personalization. And it's just kind of a good thing, gives you a lot more insight into what's going on. So triggers, if we here in integration, click on one of our graph stacks and then click on the triggers button here, you'll see what triggers are available to us. So let's look at well, actually, let's just run down some of these things quick. So you can basically look at things by category here. Triggers all have category and action. So confidence is a trigger that indicates that a content channel is working. And what we mean by is working is that when it creates, when it shows content or recommends content, people are clicking through on it. So if you were having a content channel where it was showing you, for example, related content, and say, you might also be interested in, and someone clicked on one of the articles that was shown in the presentation of that content channel, then that would be the time to send a confidence trigger back to Axilent saying, hey, someone actually clicked through on something that came out of this content channel. Affinity is basically means the user likes that content. So if that content, for example, represented a product and the user purchased it, then that is a good time to have an affinity trigger sent out about that particular piece of content. Alternately, if you had maybe like add this article to my favorites or something, or send an article to a friend by email, or tweet it or something, that would also be a good time to send an affinity trigger back to Axilent. Ban is sort of the opposite of affinity. That means a user specifically does not like something. So maybe if it's, for example, if it was something that you could do user reviews on, like a user reviewing an app or reviewing a restaurant or something like that, and they gave it a really bad review, 1 star, you could say, well, that's a ban trigger. These affinity and band are both used in personalization. This forms the basis of the user's tastes, and everything revolves around that. CF is kind of interesting. CF stands for collaborative filtering. And the basic idea with collaborative filtering is that instead of trying to create a taxonomical way of associating content together, which is the way we do things like field-related and tag-related content, with collaborative filtering, we just take user input about how things ought to be associated and tie them together that way. So this can come out on the other side, as you can choose to have collaborative filter generated content in a content channel, and the information for it starts right here with the CF trigger. So the intent here is that if a user does something that has the effect of grouping content together, you are sending a CF trigger indicating that content is grouped. So for example, if you know, a user has a favorites function where you can take different content items and add them to your favorites, you might start to send CF triggers back to Axilent with that whole list of items that are in their favorites together, indicating that a user has grouped them together, so they have some level of you know, they deserve to be associated with each other. You don't have to use triggers in order to use Axilent, but they do expand the basis of what's possible. So let's start off with a really simple one, which is we're going to do a confidence trigger for our test channel, which would be category, confidence, action, test channel. So go over to our REST console here. It's left over from the content channel. So we're going to want to change the URI, and we'll go up here to our triggers. So we'll want this method right here, which is trigger, and paste it in there. And let's have a look at this. So they're going to want to see profile, if you have one, would be a good time to send back. But the things that we absolutely need are category and action. So that's what we've got to start with. So again, checking this, we know category is confidence, and action is test-channel, which is the slug of our test channel. Okay, so let's go ahead and do the trigger integration. You'll see here on the REST console, I've got the trigger call right here. Notice the trailing slash on trigger. That's actually important for anything where we do non-GET requests, posts or put. There should be a trailing slash and everything. Now the two parameters we have to have are category and action, and because this is a data parsing function, trigger, we need to have it all here as a JSON body that we post up. So it's category confidence and action test channel, and that should be it. We hit post, send that up, and that's your standard response from a trigger. Okay, and that is pretty much it for that. You would use this for anything where you're integrating with triggers. There are a couple of different things here that are optional. You can pass in a timestamp if you'd like, and it will, you know, use that as the current time for the trigger. Otherwise, it'll just generate whatever the current time is as a timestamp. Profile, if you pass that in, then that'll be associated with that specific user, which is critical for things like affinity triggers, where it's establishing that a particular person likes a particular content item. Some triggers will like to see different variables. The environment is described right here, and this is something we're going to be using more later on as we continue to develop features for Axilent, but it is information about where this trigger takes place. So you can see things like this is the operating system of the user, the location, the lat-long coordinates of the user, form factors such as is this a laptop, a tablet, a phone, whatever. Integration is kind of an indication about what Axilent is integrated with. So if you're identifying, this is my website or something, you can put it here. User's web browser, and then channel is sort of an arbitrary concept that roughly corresponds to the idea of a marketing channel. Like I said, we're not doing too much with this yet, but we will be doing more and more with environment data as we roll out new features. And that is pretty much it for trigger integration for the moment. Okay, so finally, let's look at some library integration. This would be more common to be the kind of thing you would do if you were integrating Axilent with an existing CMS. And in fact, the library API is what gets used by our WordPress plugin, and it'll be used by other plugins for content management systems that we're going to be making in the future. With library integration, you need a library key. So from the integration panel, we'll hit Configure Library Integration and then API Key Management. And here's our library key. We'll grab that. And go over to our REST console and set this here in here we are. Boom. Set the header. And what I thought we would do is programmatically tag a piece of content. So we have in our library API, which is right here, we have a tag content function right here. Let me grab that. Okay, so let's see what we need for this. For tag content, we need to have these 4 required parameters. So the content key is going to be the key of the content being tagged. Okay, so fine, let's go to our inbox here, grab one of our favorites. That's in Manhattan Rye. And just for reference right now, we'll check the tags on it, and there are no tags on Hudson Manhattan Rye. So let's grab the key, which we can find right here. Go back to our it had to be called content_key. So go to our REST console, and just to check here, this tag content is not data parsing, so we're going to be using parameters for this. Right here. So content key, and paste that in. That is the key from the content. Okay, what else do we need here? The project we're using. Project. And what is project? It is Whiskey Engine. Third parameter is the tag. So let's call it delicious. And then our fourth is the content type. And lo and behold, whiskey is what that is. Alright, so we've got our parameters set up, we've got our authorization set up, we've got the path set up. So let's call that. Oh, look at that. This content type does not allow content creation via API. This is a 403, which is a permission problem. Now, why would it be like this? Well, the answer is, if we go look at our content types, look at whiskey, under settings, we'll see allow content posting has not been checked. This is a security feature, and by default it's not checked. And but we can change that right now. Let's try it again. There you go. And here's the response. And the API is telling us tag content, whiskey, there's the key, and here is the tag. So let's see, let's go over here, back to the inbox again. Grab our Hudson Manhattan Rye, and let's check out those tags. There is our tag. Delicious. So now this is something that is significant if you're doing a CMS integration. If you have facility to tag content in your content management system and you want to pass that tagging through to Axilent, that would be the way you would do it there. Okay, that has been a number of examples showing integration with Axilent. As I said, you definitely want to check out the documentation, the API reference documentation, all of the tutorials and whatnot at docs.axilent.com, and then also check out, if you need some support, check out our Git Satisfaction community, gitsatisfaction.com/Axilent. We're also happy to answer questions at info@axilent.com. Thanks a lot. Bye.